I don't think we're getting sound from you. I don't think the sound's coming through still.
Are you on the main channel, Mom?
Rachel, can we turn off interpretation for a moment and see if we can hear Mon?
Language interpretation is off. Man, if you want to try.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I was on the English channel, but technical difficulties. So we will have interpretation today. If you're joining from a computer, in order to access interpretation, you'll select the globe at the bottom of the screen and select the language channel you'd like to participate, and you can mute the original audio. You'll do something similar if you're joining from a cell phone. You'll just click those three little dots, click More, Language Interpretation, then the channel in which you'd like to participate. A reminder about interpretation, please slowly speak one language at a time and one speaker at a time. And now I will do this in Hindi. आज हम हिंदी इंटरप्रिटेशन प्रोवाइड करेंगे, मैं और स्वाति ये प्रोवाइड करेंगे। और अगर आप कंप्यूटर से ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं, नीचे एक ग्लोब है, उसको सिलेक्ट करना और सिलेक्ट हिंदी और या इंग्लिश जो आपकी प्रेफरेंस है, और फिर आप ओरिजिनल ऑडियो को म्यूट कर सकते हैं। अगर सेल फोन से ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं तो सेम चीज है, नीचे एक 3 लिटिल डॉट्स है और फिर लैंग्वेज इंटरप्रिटेशन, एंड देन जो चैनल आपको प्रेफरेंस है वो पिक कर सकते हैं। और अगर इंटरप्रिटेशन सुन रहे हैं तो जस्ट अगर पैनलिस्ट हैं तो जस्ट स्लोली और एक ही शब्द एट टाइम और फिर एक ही स्पीकर।
And the interpretation should be turned back on now.
Thank you so much, everyone. And hi, I'm Lorelei. I am this, and welcome. I'm so sorry. Just the tech difficulties have me a little bit. What I meant to say is welcome to the 6th event in the two-week-long conference, Informal, Criminalized, Precarious, Sex Workers Organizing Against Barriers. My name is Lorelei Lee, and I'm a sex worker activist, writer, and organizer. I'm a co-founder of the Disabled Sex Workers Coalition, a founding member of both the Upstate New York Sex Workers Coalition and Decrim Massachusetts, a researcher and analyst with Hacking Hustling, and a Justice Catalyst Fellow at the Cornell Gender Justice Clinic. The Sex Workers Organizing Against Barriers Conference is co-facilitated by the Disabled Sex Workers Coalition, Hacking Hustling, Cornell Law School Gender Justice Clinic, Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, and the Center for Information Technology and Public Life at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I am so grateful for our conference co-organizers, Rachel Kuo, Danielle Blunt, Zara Stardust, and Tiffany So, as well as for our conference co-sponsors, the Berger International Legal Studies Program, the Dorothy S. Clark Program in Feminist Jurisprudence, the Cornell Labor Law Clinic, the Cornell student chapters of Outlaw, National Lawyers Guild, Women's Law Coalition, and the Black Law Students Association, Justice Catalyst, the Red Umbrella Fund, and the Asian American Feminist Collective. Special thanks also to Livia Folds, Naomi Loren, Eves, and Alexis Briggs for all of your work and support. Thank you also to all of you who have donated via the Eventbrite page. Our co-sponsors and our public donations ensure that we can follow one of our core ethics in this organizing, which is to pay people for their labor. In particular, sex worker organizers who do so much work that is unrecognized and unfunded. As I think you all can tell, this conference was born out of a lot of collective work and a lot of collective dreaming. For each of our conference panels, live closed captioning and streaming to YouTube are available, and recordings and transcripts will be available afterward at hackinghustling.org, where you can also find a schedule of each of the events in the conference. Our community agreements are adapted from the Asian American Feminist Collective, Brave Space, Collective Sex, Alt-Div Hummingbirds, and By Us, For Us, and are as follows. First, to bring in our histories and to speak from our own experiences. Second, to be committed to each other's collective learning and growing. Third, to be open to learning. Fourth, to not share pirated work, including books, pornography, and any other art form. Fifth, to respect the diversity of our identities, which, particularly for the purpose of this conference, includes not assuming the identities of organizers and activists for whom sharing every element of our lived experiences is not always safe. This also includes not dead naming or doxing anyone. In other words, not sharing other people's personal information without their consent. Sixth, to practice not using ableist language. Seventh, to prioritize caring for ourselves and each other. This last agreement in particular is a disability justice issue, and both our panelists and our audience members should feel free to do whatever is needed to care for yourselves during this conference, including standing up, moving around, lying down, or even disengaging from any of the events at any time. Throughout this conference, many of our panelists are zooming in from North America and Australia, where we are living on stolen land that is still and always Indigenous land. To learn more about the land you're living on, you can look to the resources provided by the Native Governance Center, which are available at nativegov.org. And I should say that website is specific to the United States. This panel today, Sex Work in a Transnational Context, brings together sex worker organizers from India, Kenya, and the Netherlands to discuss our separate and overlapping issues and how our movement goals are and must be transnational. Our event today will feature approximately 60 minutes of conversation with our speakers, and then we'll open up the floor to questions and answers if we have time. You're welcome to use the Q&A or the chat features on Zoom to ask questions throughout, and we'll answer as many of them as possible at the end. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing today's moderator and organizer. Tiffany is a freelance writer and producer whose work focuses on Asian American issues, sex work, gender, labor, policy, and their many intersections. She is also a co-founder and leader of the Asian American Feminist Collective. Thank you so much and welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Lorelai. Thank you for bringing us all here together, and thank you so much for everyone who has made this panel across 4 time zones possible. I think it's already an incredible feat that we're all here together. I want to warn everyone first that this conversation may feel short because each of these speakers has an enormous amount of experience and knowledge to share in their organizing work within their own localities and also transnationally. But in dreaming up this panel, I wanted to prioritize getting everyone in the same space, in dialogue with each other, and in community rather than delving deeply into every single issue or answering every single question. So I want to thank these 4 incredible panelists for joining us for this conference. And I really hope that we can continue to communicate and build together. So without further ado, I would like to introduce each speaker briefly, and then we can get into the conversation. We have Bhaditi Day, who is a former sex worker who now leads up the Durbar Mahila Samanwaya Committee, or Durbar, a collective of 75,000 sex workers from across the West Bengal region, founded in 1995. It's managed by sex workers and their children. She served as the president for All India Network of Sex Workers, AINSW. Bharati grew up the daughter of an agricultural worker in Kolkata, India. When her parents tried to arrange her to be married, she left home and entered the sex work industry. In her work, she witnessed violence against sex workers and began organizing and advocating for sex workers in 1997. She has been abused and jailed in response to her advocacy. In 2003, she became the project coordinator for an HIV/AIDS prevention program funded by the World Health Organization in Durbar. She was promoted to project director and worked there for 6 years before she became the president of Durbar. Durbar means unstoppable in Bengali, and aims to strengthen sex workers' rights through solidarity and to reduce the stigma and discrimination they face. We also have Grace Kamau, who is the Africa Sex Workers Alliance, or ASWA, regional director or coordinator. She is an advocate of health and human rights of key populations, including sex workers, LGBTI, and people who use drugs. She has 15 years of experience in advocacy, resource mobilization, and capacity building. Grace has worked as a consultant for the global network of sex work projects, where she documented the lived experiences of sex workers and examples of good practices that informed the development of advocacy tools to strengthen sex worker-led groups' engagement with HIV policymakers and programmers to amplify their voices locally, regionally, and globally. Grace holds a degree in sociology and political science from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. She is also an AIDS vaccine advocacy coalition fellow. The overall goal of the program is to expand and strengthen the capacity of civil society advocates and organizations to monitor, support, and help shape biomedical HIV prevention research and rapid rollout of new effective interventions in low and middle income countries with HIV burdens. Caroline Jorogi is the programs person at Kenya's Sex Workers Alliance, or KESWA, residing in Nairobi. As a sex worker, Caroline is passionate about realizing gender equality, community empowerment, capacity building, and strengthening the diverse sex workers organizing. An accomplished human rights and HIV prevention advocate for key populations who has facilitated the national government under the Ministry of Health, NASCOP, to develop a national guideline for the use of PrEP during the 2015 AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition Fellowship. Caroline has worked as a national or regional coordinator consultant for the Global Network of Sex Workers Projects to develop a PrEP briefing paper capturing voices from Zimbabwe, Kenya, and South Africa. She has 8 years of experience working with the national movement of sex workers in Kenya, focusing on achieving social justice, inclusive participation, decision-making, and designing of structural barriers, interventions, but with, by, and for sex workers. Alexis Wilson-Briggs joins us from Red Umbrella Fund, which she joined in 2019, and is the program associate for Africa, Canada, and the US. Alexis was born in California and graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, with a bachelor's in philosophy in 2004. Prior to completing her degree, she worked at the Lusty Lady in San Francisco and was part of efforts to unionize the Peep Show in 1996. In 2007, Alexis earned a Juris Doctor from Temple University School of Law in Philadelphia and returned to California to work as a criminal defense attorney in private practice for 7 years. She provided pro bono mass defense for Occupy Wall Street protesters in California and members of Anonymous in PayPal 14 case in federal court. Compelled by her experience at the Lusty and the over-policing and incarceration of her communities, she has spent over 20 years seeking to abolish prisons and end enforcement of vice and poverty-based crimes through community activism and allying with nonprofits within the criminal justice and drug policy sectors, informed by a multitude of roles as an activist and as an advocate. She supports community-led harm reductionist theories of change. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of tripping up on my words. I'm a little nervous and there's a lot going on this morning. So first I would love to hear from each of the organizers. Feel free to turn on your camera or not, that is completely your choice. But how has the pandemic impacted your organizing? What are some urgent issues you're currently addressing in your respective spaces? And just what are you working on? And I would love to start with Grace. And also I would invite everyone to speak slower. I'm sorry if I'm not modeling that correctly, but to speak slowly and one voice at a time. So Grace, I would love for you to answer if you are here and available.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for your question. So I'll go straight to your question on the challenges and how the pandemic has affected our work. I think number one has been the greatest, and it's the loss of livelihoods and loss of income amongst our sex workers. And that has been the biggest issue. And so by that we have seen one, a change of dynamics of work. And we have seen now sex work is changing from the usual that we knew, going to the street, going to the brothel. And now we have seen in the African context, sex workers doing sex work online. And so we have seen a gap where before then, most of the sex workers were doing work, not online, but in the streets and in the brothel. And we have seen a gap in digital literacy. There's a lot of gaps when it comes to sex workers using online, even digital safety. Sex workers don't know about digital safety. So this one is one of the biggest challenge. And then we have seen increased violence among sex workers because you get someone online, you go have sex with that someone, or you go do sex work with that someone, but you don't know about the safety. And so we've seen increased of violence among sex workers. And even due to the COVID and everybody is struggling with the difficult economic times. So a rise of violence. And also we have seen gender-based violence going up amongst sex workers. We have also seen inaccessible healthcare services. Currently, for example, when COVID came, we have seen countries imposing things like lockdowns and our transportation and public transport to clinics where sex workers we access treatment. It becomes very hard. So we've seen sex workers keeping even medicine because of lack of transport, lack of even ways to get to that transport. But we have seen some of the groups becoming very innovative and talking to donors to be able to get, for example, like motorcycles that can be able to distribute medicine to sex workers. But it's been a very big challenge. And so one of the questions is, are we going to go back to the 10 years? We have done a lot of gains in HIV programs and ensuring that we have put a majority of sex workers on ARVs and on drugs, and education that we have done to sex workers to ensure that sex workers are responsible of health. And finally, I want to say that we've been pushed to a place where we need to reprogram and rethink because we have never experienced something like this. And so we have been doing things as usual. And so we've been forced now to know that COVID is here. How do we program with COVID as a pandemic that is here with us? So one of the other things is we have seen sex workers pushing for economic empowerment in a way where if there is lockdown, me as a sex worker, can I have somewhere I can go to get an extra coin? If my bar is closed, where do I go get money? So economic empowerment, viable economic option, or economic empowerment for sex workers. These are some of the things. I don't want to go further because there are many, but I want to let the other speakers also contribute to this issue.
Yeah, and of course, I also wanted to, make sure that everyone also knew about the, time curfew in Kenya. So if our panelists and audience joining from Kenya have to leave early, we completely understand. And also a reminder for all panelists to slow down a little bit more for our Hindi interpreters. Speaking of which, Bharati, I would love to hear from you. What are some urgent issues you're addressing and how things changed due to COVID? Bharati?
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to invite you to answer the question.
So you speak to Hindi? No. Translate to Hindi. Hello?
Hello.
Translate to Hindi.
Is she on the main channel or? Oh, okay. Sorry. I'll pass it to Caroline if you are able to answer that question as well on how the pandemic has impacted your organizing and what you're addressing right now during COVID.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I won't repeat most of the things that has been said previously because they are much more like the same, but I will speak on how we have been addressing the challenges that we are facing. Some of the challenges that the sex workers have been facing during the COVID-19 pandemic is that as the Kenya Sex Workers Alliance has organizing of over 75 member groups that are spread across the country. And given that our country is devolved into counties and the lockdown and all the government restrictive measures to contain COVID-19 that was set, there was no time or any opportunity to have gatherings or be able to be around sex workers, which has led to having sex workers who have faced violations, being charged, taken to court, and the process of bailing them out becoming a challenge because of the movement. We have also seen that advocacy that has been virtual is not efficient as opposed to physical advocacy that we meet one-on-one with policymakers and during sensitizations that we've been having with the law enforcement and other stakeholders who we target with sensitizations. With the COVID-19, that when it just came in, there was no information about how sex workers to protect themselves and any other alternative way of the sex workers ensuring that they have their daily bread on the table other than hanging out on social joints and other places that they are used to working in. And so that was a huge challenge on passing information. So we opted out to having the digital literacy sessions of ensuring that sex workers are able to adequately utilize social media technology to pass information and also to be able to protect on how they are not going to contact COVID-19 by providing with COVID-19 PPEs, ensuring that sex workers in care have to adhere to their medication consistently without failure, even in the rural and the slums area where sex workers sometimes would go without food. So we, as the national movement, we came in and ensured that we lobbied for some of the basic necessities to be donated to sex workers. We have been continuously pushing for the decriminalization of sex work. That has been happening virtually. And we are also ensuring that sex workers, despite the low commodity supplies, including the sexual reproductive health right commodities such as family planning, that they access the commodities in their respective localities. We have been able to create more synergies and strengthening the existing networks that we have. That is with the women-led organizations and ensuring that sex workers have spaces within their counties. That is, in Kenya, we have a government fund that is being led by Women Rep, the women representative in the county, where we have pushed for sex workers to be able to access the funds and also food and non-food stuff to keep them moving. Thank you very much, Tidi.
I would love to
Okay, Patana. Hello.
take the chance. Hi,
Hello.
I would love to take the chance to make sure that Bharati is on the correct channel so that we're able to translate this panel to her.
Translate to Hindi?
Yeah, Bharati, Mon, do you mind asking her if she's able to join the Hindi channel? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, is she able to hear y'all? Bharati, can you hear Mon and Swati?
Yeah. I am here.
Oh. I think she's on the Hindi channel now because I hear her at a lower volume. Okay, so I would love to ask her the question once y'all are on the Hindi channel, just to hear how her work has been impacted by the pandemic and what she's urgently organizing around right now.
হিন্দি চ্যানেলটা তো বুঝতেই পারছি হিন্দি চ্যানেলটা কোথায় করেছে হিন্দি চ্যানেল দাঁড়াও কি বলছে
Hi, this is Rachel. I'm just going to jump in. So when Bharati is speaking, I think everybody, participants and attendees, can hear on the main. So then we'll just need simultaneous, like Hindi, or then one of the interpreters to switch over to English to then translate Bharati into English for people tuned into the English channel.
No interpreter in Hindi? কোথায় হিন্দি চ্যানেলটা দিয়েছে ইন্টারপ্রেটার মেয়ে ছিল দেখাচ্ছে না তো না ঠিকই আছে ও চ্যানেল থেকে ইন্টারপ্রেটার ছিল কিন্তু হিন্দি চ্যানেলটা কোথায় দিলে বুঝতেই পারছি না দেখাবে দাঁড়া কি বলছে sorry for any do not hurt anything in English হিন্দি চ্যানেলটা এখন
Thank you everyone for bearing with us. This is what happens though, of course, whenever we work, you know, across languages and we want to make sure that everyone has access.
এই করে মাথা খারাপ করে শুরুটাই হলো না কোনো
I hear her on the main or on the English channel at least, and which might mean she's on the main channel.
মডারেটর তো এখানে আছে কিন্তু হিন্দি চ্যানেল তো কিছুই দেখছি না ও টেস্ট করছে দাঁড়া
Okay, I mean, I would love to, I guess at the moment then, I don't know if we should try to figure this out right now on the spot, or if we should, because I also don't want to delay Bharati getting on the correct channel.
ও হিন্দি চ্যানেলটা ইয়ে করছে কিন্তু কোথায় আমি জানি হ্যাঁ না এখানে নেই ও দেখছে মনে হয় তার কারণ হলো হিন্দি ইন্টারপ্রেটার আছে ওদের কিন্তু সেটা কোথায় আছে কিন্তু দেখাচ্ছে না তো ইংলিশ হিন্দি হিন্দি চ্যানেলে করতে বলছে কোনটা হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হয়েছে
If we want also, potentially we could just do simultaneous, have Bharati speak, take a pause, and then have Mon or Swati interpret in English. And so we're all on the same channel and it will be a little slower.
না
potentially.
এটাকে ক্লিক করতে বলছে করে এখানে কি দেখাচ্ছে দেখো এটা হিন্দি তাহলে হিন্দিতে ক্লিক করো হ্যাঁ हाँ किया हाँ आप जो बोल रहे हैं हम सुन रहा कि ओके अभी तो समझ में भी नहीं ना। अच्छा
On the Hindi channel?
अच्छा ठीक है ओके
Okay, okay. Okay, so are we all set? We're
हाँ
good.
हाँ कोविड-19 में जो हुआ कि पहले तो जो लॉकडाउन हुआ था उस टाइम में सिचुएशन बहुत खराब था। तो उस टाइम में क्या किया कि कोई कस्टमर नहीं आता था लड़के लोग के पास, कोई सेक्स वर्कर के पास। उस टाइम खाने पीने का बहुत मुश्किल हो गया था। तो उस टाइम में दुर्बर का तरफ से और उषा कोऑपरेटिव जो है ओनली फॉर सेक्स वर्कर बैंक, वो बैंक का तरफ से वो जो रेशन वगैरह बहुत कुछ रेशन चाल डाल जो जो लगता है पूरा कुछ हम लोग दिया है। उसके बाद सारे जगह में हम लोग एडवोकेसी किया है। उसके बाद वहां से भी बहुत सारे सामान आया और हर दीदी लोग को हर बहन लोग को हम लोग दिया था। और अगला मार्च से लेके अभी तक अभी भी आज भी हम लोग दिया है, मतलब अभी भी हम लोग दे रहा है वो लोग का। हेलो हेलो अच्छा ओके हाँ हाँ। तो हम लोग जब रेशन दिया उसके साथ में बच्चा लोग जो है उसके ड्राई फ्रूट उसका जो ड्रेस है वो भी हम लोग दिया है। और लड़की लोग का हर लड़की लोग का 8 से 9 हजार साड़ी 9,000 साड़ी सब लड़की लोग को दिया है। उसके बाद बच्चा लोग के पढ़ने के लिए कुछ पैसा भी हम लोग दिया है। हर जगह में एडवोकेसी करने के बाद उषा का तरफ से कुछ पैसा भी वो लोग को दिया है। आप पूरा बोल ले तो उसके बाद आप इंटरप्रेट कीजिएगा क्या अभी तो रुक जाए। अच्छा
I'm hearing
तो
I'm
उसके
hearing
बाद हम
both
लोग क्या किया कि
Swati
अभी
and
देखिए
Mon
जो
interpreting both.
बच्चा लोगों का पढ़ने का बात हो रहा है, कोई दीदी लोग के पास स्मार्टफोन नहीं है, किसी के पास कंप्यूटर नहीं है कि बच्चा लोगों का लॉकडाउन में ऑनलाइन में पढ़ा लिखा करे कैसे करेगा। तो इसीलिए हम लोग बोलता है हम लोग सरकार के पास जग गया। और हम लोग का जो दीदी लोग था बहुत लड़की लोगों को रेशन कार्ड था फिर भी रेशन ठीक से नहीं मिलता था। और बहुत लोगों का दीदी लोग का था कि कोई रेशन कार्ड नहीं था, तो उन लोग का तो और भी मुश्किल था। इसलिए हम लोग सुप्रीम कोर्ट में अप्लाई किया था कि जिसका रेशन कार्ड है उसको पूरा के पूरा रेशन दिया जाए और जिसका रेशन कार्ड नहीं है उसको फूड कूपन दिया जाए कि वो लोग रेशन मिले उसको। तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने 3 दिन का अंदर वो राय दिया है और हर स्टेट में बोल दिया कि सब लड़की लोगों को सेक्स वर्कर को और बच्चे सब सेक्स वर्कर को रेशन वगैरह देना चाहिए। साथ साथ रेशन कार्ड भी देना चाहिए, फूड कूपन भी देना चाहिए जैसे कि वो लोग को रेशन मिले। तो उस टाइम में राय देने का बाद अभी सब लड़की लोग को रेशन और फूड कूपन का तरफ से रेशन भी मिलता है और हम लोग का तरफ से वो लड़की लोग को हम लोग रेशन देता है। सर अभी अभी देखिए वहां पर जब जब लॉकडाउन शुरू हुआ था उसके बाद जब आस्ते आस्ते हम लोग जो दीदी लोग का जब मोहल्ला खुला आस्ते आस्ते, अभी तो थोड़ा सिचुएशन ठीक हो रहा है तो फिर भी अभी भी तो शुरू हो गया। तो इसके बाद क्या होगा कोई मालूम नहीं। तो हम हर लड़की के पास जाके हम लोग बोला आप लोग कस्टमर लो लेकिन उसको सचेतन होना चाहिए जैसे कि सैनिटाइजर मास्क तो थर्मोगन सब दे के उसको टेस्ट करना और मास्क यूज करना साबुन यूज करना ये सब उसको बोला। हाथ मुंह धोने के लिए बहुत हम लोग किया, घर घर में जाके उसको हम लोग उसको सचेतन किया कि आप लोग ऐसा कीजिए उसके बाद उसको कस्टमर ले लीजिए आप। उसके बाद हम लोग क्या किया कि आगे अभी हम लोग बोलता है कि दीदी लोग के पास जो रेशन मिलता है वो तो ठीक ही है लेकिन हर जगह में कि बच्चे लोगों के लिए तो उतना सफिशिएंट कुछ नहीं है कि स्मार्टफोन कंप्यूटर कुछ भी नहीं है। तो इसीलिए हम लोग भी सरकार का तरफ आवेदन किया है कि ये बच्चों के पास जैसे हम लोग का यहाँ पर हुआ है कि 9-10 जो लोग पढ़ता है जो बच्चा लोग उसको एक लैपटॉप दिया जाए, मतलब 10,000 रुपया सरकार की तरफ से उसको दिया जाए। एक घोषणा किया है सरकार का तरफ से, लेकिन हर लड़की के पास हर बच्चों के पास तो नहीं जाता है। इसलिए हम लोग भी बोलता है सरकार के पास जाके जो आप लोग घर घर में जाके सब बच्चा लोगों को पढ़ने के लिए कोई सुजोग सुविधा कर दे जैसे कि वो लोग पढ़ कर सकते। अभी भी तो स्कूल नहीं खुला है, कोई स्कूल नहीं खुला है, तो बच्चा लोगों को पढ़ने के लिए कुछ सुविधाएं मिलना चाहिए। ये हम लोग सरकार के पास जाके बोला लॉकडाउन का सिचुएशन में। हाँ हाँ
Thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to make this work technically, and I really appreciate you sharing. For captioning purposes, I'm going to remind people that, or I'm going to remind Nicole that you can join the English channel for interpretation in order to hear the English interpreter for captioning. And then for folks joining as well, be sure to join the English channel for English speakers and the Hindi channel for Hindi speakers. But I'm really glad that you were able to join and that we were able to make this work because we have so much to learn from you. I do want, and yes, to the interpreters, we were able to hear you, both of you at once at a moment. But Alexis, I would love to allow you a chance to speak since you've been patiently waiting. I would love to hear how your international and transnational work has been impacted, especially from your side, at working for Red Umbrella Fund.
Thanks, Tiffany. Yeah, it's my pleasure. Also, it's new to me since Asia is not within my region. I really appreciate hearing from Bharati as well. Thank you for all of your efforts to include so much of the global movement in this event. Thank you for having me, Lorelai and Tiffany. It's a pleasure to join also Grace and Caroline. The Red Umbrella Fund's core mission and strategy was developed by sex workers primarily based in Europe, Africa, and Asia, the same year as the Sex Worker Freedom Festival, with the support of a few dedicated funders, including Mama Cash, our host organization, and the American Jewish World Service, and a few committed individuals like Heather Doyle when she was at Open Society Foundation. COVID has revealed in the last year how well sex worker leadership serves the movement. The pandemic affirmed the importance of focusing on core flexible funding and influencing other funders to give more and better funding to sex worker-led organizations. As you heard from the other panelists, the ability to reach directly into communities in ways that the communities themselves are directing is critical response when events like this unfold. What was different this year was shifting budgets that were earmarked for travel. Part of this included influencing donors, including we're part of a global consortium called CMI. We advocated within that consortium to shift money that was earmarked for travel to be converted into emergency grants to all the sex worker-led organizations that were current grantees of the consortium. And the PAC, which is our grant-making decision body, which is sex worker-led, met online this year. So we shifted all the money that would have gone to the logistics and put that directly into stipends for the leadership.
Hello.
Yes, Bharati, we hear you here on the English channel.
हम एक पहले वाला जो बात किया ना उसमें एक बात जोड़ना चाहता हूँ कि हम लोग का अच्छा सॉरी
Yeah, no problem.
हाँ आप पूछिए आप अच्छा ठीक है ओके थैंक यू
Sure, yeah. Now we are preparing for a second year of online grant making. That will include our call for applications, and that will be in June through the end of July. And then we'll also be putting out a call this year. We paused for a year, but this year we're resuming our process of replacing PAC members as they cycle out. And also 2 of our international steering committee members, which is also sex worker led, will have finished their terms. So we'll be putting out calls on our social media in the next few months for that. And then our other urgent issues is to expand beyond human rights funders to reflect the diversity of the sex worker movement, to include more funding from places like labor rights and LGBTQAI+ and other organizations that have not yet committed resources to support sex workers' rights.
Yes, thank you. And I also want to say thank you to Alexis for doing so much of this like outreach work, because without her, we wouldn't have as much of a global network for this conference anyway, you know, being just in touch, right, with so many like leaders from different organizations. You know, I'm really grateful that you're able to like, you know, use your position also to help us, you know, get into conversation. And I'm really hoping that Bharati is back on the Hindi channel now, because my next question is very much centered on the work that that has come out of India. Bharati, are you on the Hindi channel? Okay, great. But yeah, so I wanted to get into this transnational work that is the sex worker movement. So we know that, you know, the criminalization of sex work is a nearly global issue. It certainly is in the US, India, and across Africa, which is why it's really important for us to acknowledge that sex workers' rights is truly like an international movement. One thing that I sadly only learned this year is that the International Sex Workers Day, which was last month on March 3rd, was actually born from an event organized by Durbar, when in 2001, over 25,000 sex workers gathered in India for a festival, despite anti-sex work groups trying to pressure the government to revoke their permit. And then in 2012, when sex workers were excluded from attending the International AIDS Conference in Washington, D.C. due to US immigration policies, Durbar, AINSW, and the Asia Pacific Network of Sex Workers held an alternative event in Calcutta, India, the Sex Workers Freedom Festival, or Calcutta Freedom Festival, in which sex workers from 30 to 40 countries take part in 5 days of discussions and workshops and protests and more. So I'd love to hear some insight about the learnings from these international events or other transnational and international sex worker exchanges. You know, how does communicating across borders inform your organizing? And I'd love to open that up for anyone who's able to speak on it. And Grace and Caroline, if y'all have time constraints, please feel free to speak first.
न पहले कि 2001 में हम लोग जो मेला किया था, हेलो, हाँ, तो उसमें क्या है, जब सॉल्ट लेक स्टेडियम में हम लोग को मेला करने के लिए गया था, लेकिन उसमें से कोई परमिशन नहीं मिलता था। सबको एक ही बात है कि सेक्स वर्कर के लिए यहाँ पर कोई मेला नहीं होगा, कि उतना सारे सोनागाछी सब जगह में लड़के लोग आएगा तो ये मोहल्ला खराब हो जाएगा, मोहल्ला का लोग खराब बोलेगा, बहुत कुछ समस्या तैयारी करेगा लोग। तो हम पहले क्या किया कि अगर कल सुबह हम लोग का मेला में मंत्री आएगा और अभी पूरा के पूरा सब कुछ हो गया, सिर्फ परमिशन नहीं मिला, तो इसीलिए बहुत हम लोग को मुसीबत, बहुत चैलेंज का मुकाबला करना पड़ा। और हम लोग तो रात में क्या गया कि सुभाष चक्रवर्ती था, वो सीपीएम पार्टी का एक मंत्री, उसका पास मिनिस्टर, उसका पास गया था। तो उसके बाद बहुत सारे बात हुआ था कि हम लोग कैसे उसके साथ बात करें, कैसे हम लोग को मिला करें, बहुत प्रॉब्लम हो गया, इतना सारे जगह से सेक्स वर्कर लोग, दीदी लोग आ रहा है, इतना सारे से लोग आ रहा है। तो उसके बाद हम लोग जाके वो सुबह जाके फिर सुभाष चौधरी के पास गया, उसके बाद बहुत बातचीत किया, उसके बाद अल्टीमेट हम लोग का परमिशन मिला। तो उस टाइम में हम लोग को इतना नाजाल होना पड़ा, उतना चैलेंज का मुकाबला होना पड़ा कि, सुनाई दे रहा है दीदी, हेलो, हाँ, इतना चैलेंज लेना पड़ा और इतना सुना, लास्ट में हम लोग को इतना परेशानी हो गया, लास्ट में सुबह 10 बजे हम लोग का वो मेला उद्बोधन होगा और 9:30 बजे हम लोग को परमिशन मिला। तो उस टाइम में 2001 से हम लोग ये हम लोग ठीक किया था, ये हम लोग निर्णय लिया था कि ये 2001 से हम लोग को आज सेक्स वर्कर राइट्स डे, इंटरनेशनल सेक्स वर्कर राइट्स डे हम लोग मानेंगे, क्योंकि इतना हिम्मत से ये लड़ना पड़ा, इतना हिम्मत से मेला करना पड़ा कि लास्ट में जब 10 बजे मेला शुरू होगा और 9:30 बजे हम लोग को परमिशन मिला, तो उस दिन से हम लोग के सेक्स वर्कर्स डे, इंटरनेशनल सेक्स वर्कर डे हिसाब से मान लिया था। कि उस टाइम बहुत चैलेंज लेना पड़ा था, बहुत मुश्किल का बात हो गया था। अल्टीमेट हम लोग ये परमिशन मिला था हम लोगों को। तो इसीलिए हम लोग को उस दिन से हम लोग 3 मार्च, उस दिन 3 मार्च, 3 मार्च था, मार्च महीना का 3 तारीख, तो उस दिन से 3 मार्च हम लोग सेक्स वर्कर्स, इंटरनेशनल सेक्स वर्कर डे हिसाब से हम लोग मानता है। और क्वेश्चन?
I would love to hear from Grace or Caroline too. I know that the first Sex Worker Freedom Festival really impacted a lot of international and like transnational movement, building or capacity building. So I would love to hear, how the work in like Kenya or Africa has been informed by this kind of international work.
Okay, sure. So I want to share about the learning that has existed for some time, because I want to talk about back in 2010 when sex workers went for the Freedom Festival. And from the Freedom Festival, sex workers from Africa learned from the Indian sex workers. And from there,
बाद में मतलब बहुत जगह से जो लड़की लोग आया था, वो सेक्स वर्कर लोग आया था, उन्होंने बात रखा, अपना मोहल्ला का अपना बात।
Okay, so
sorry, Grace, continue.
So I wanted to say, from the Freedoms Festival that happened, as sex workers, we realized that there's a lot of knowledge amongst our sex workers. It might not exist in the continent that we are, but there's a lot of learning that exists across the continent. And so as sex workers, we felt that it's something that we wanted to pursue. So after the Freedom Festival, and luckily we got a few people who supported a trip back for sex workers for learning. And so when about 5 sex workers went back to India and learned about the model that sex workers were using and how sex workers are implementing. And as sex workers from Africa, we took the learning, and because of the different contexts, we realized that some of the things that the Indian sex workers were doing, in our context, it was not practical. But we took the learning and put it in our context as Africans. And from there is where we got the birth of the African Sex Workers Academy. So the Academy is a program that brings together sex workers from Africa. So we have done 25 editions of the African Sex Workers Academy. We have trained 486 activists across Africa, and we have trained sex workers in 33 African countries. And so in that learning, the Indian sex workers used to come to Kenya, because the academy is done in Kenya, used to come to Kenya and help us shape the academy. So I want to give a lot of credit to the Indian sex workers, because the academy was coined from the Indian sex workers. And one of the things that we also learned through the process is a lot of learning that the Indian sex workers were learning is something that was practical to us, but there were things that were differing. For example, Indian sex workers call organizing as collectives, but for us, we call them organizations, organizing, movement building. So such names, we were able to change names, but those names that resonated to us. And I'm proud to say that we have a very vocal African Sex Workers Academy that is doing a lot of capacity building of activists. And with that, as the African Sex Workers Academy, we did an evaluation, and we learned that sex workers want to the academy to go a notch high. So we want to also see how do we continue with the academy, but continue impacting different skills of sex workers. And this is because the context that we are living in, because we are seeing now COVID coming in. We have seen that there is things about mental health issues. We have also seen that there is a lot of organizations that are being developed in the as people come.
Oh, I think I lost audio for Grace. But was very inspired by everything that she was saying before her audio cut out. I'll give her a chance to come back, but if not, I would love to hear from Alexis or Caroline about the same question. I love seeing this case study of, you know, transnational sex worker movement making in process, you know, of these like cultural exchanges between India and Kenya and Africa as a whole, as a continent. And I would love to invite any of the other panelists also weigh in on that cultural exchange. Oh, and Grace is back. I didn't know if Grace has a chance to finish her thought that she was in the middle of.
Apologies for that. So I don't want to say that as the African sex workers want to take learning even higher, that we incorporate some of the issues that sex workers are telling us, and also opening up a learning hub as well in Africa, where other sex workers can come learn from us, because we have seen, we've done an academy for 10 years, so we see it's also a learning where sex workers can also come learn from us and also see what they can learn. But I also want to say that the International AIDS events, calendar days that sex workers celebrate, we have also seen visibility of organizing of sex workers. Before, wouldn't see sex workers bill, but these days you'll see that due to the calendar events, there will be an online platform where there will be visibility of sex workers, and sex workers talk about their issues. We have seen a lot of visibility, and also finally, we have a collective advocacy platform where we as sex workers can come together and say, as the African sex workers, the issue is decriminalization of sex work or violence or labor rights for sex workers. We come together, do a campaign, and use this as a collective advocacy platform. And so it's been a plus and it's been a learning. And this is something that I would like to encourage even people who support initiative to look at initiative of learning from each other, so that we don't continue reinventing the wheel, but there are things that are working on the ground. How do we encourage learning from each other? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so once again, I would love to also allow any of our other panelists to weigh in. And I think it's so powerful, the intercultural and national work that y'all do.
Yeah, this process is something that Red Umbrella Fund sees light up each year with the applications, and the PAC and the ISC. As you mentioned, Tiffany, the funds globally, and our PAC and ISC have representatives from all over with individual seats for specific regions. And all of the applications are viewed by at least one PAC member from within the applications region and at least one from outside of it. And during the decision making, the Secretariat gets to hear as the PAC shares their insights as activists and strategists and grant makers. And it provides a lot of the basis for the Secretariat to strengthen our role trying to support the movement. The other interesting process is when we get the applications, in our eligibility screening, we get 2 references for every application, including a known sex worker-led organization. And this means every year that we get, that the global network lights up and we see new leadership emerge and shift, and priorities that are shared across regions and sub-regions or within specific subsections of the movement. based on things like gender or migration status and other issues. And we see new networks develop and new funding sources emerge, and it takes on something like a power map or a snapshot of the movement once a year as all this information pours in. And organizations like DMSC and AINSW and ASW and OSWA and KESWA all provide these references for us, and we rely heavily on their insight into the movement to do that. And what we see emerge is more and more partnerships directly within the movement without intermediaries, like Grace described, as sex workers diversify their tactics, hone skills to engage locally and regionally and transnationally. And there is a massive amount of expertise in the movement. And we see strategies like the Academy, like engaging in the UN Commission on the Status of Women, like Hacking and Hustling and other research hubs, developing leadership that continues to adapt to intersectional opportunities and platforms. And it's ubiquitous all the way across the globe for the sex worker movement. And I find it very unique to the way that the sex worker-led movement functions and grows and strengthens itself internally.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's also, a great shout out for, Hacking Hustling, because this, right, what we're creating today and throughout this conference is, also here as a resource for anyone to learn, and build together. So I hope that people are taking these conversations as just like an introduction, right, into, more work together, more reaching across different time zones to connect and learn from each other. And hopefully that can also strengthen, our own local and regional organizing. I'm learning so much already. And I wanted to just ask this last question before I open it up for potential audience Q&A on the challenges and conflicts that also arise, right, through working on these larger scales, such as internationally, right, that's so much to hold, and also across cultural differences, or transnationally, because obviously, as Grace had mentioned, there are also cultural specificities. So not every, every movement is different, and every need is different. So yeah, I would love to open it up for any of our panelists to speak on, more of like the difficulties and challenges, such as tech, right, that, have made it more difficult to work transnationally and internationally. So feel free to respond whenever you want to.
Okay, so let me go first. So I think some of the challenges has been, we've seen a lot of political interference. And when I say political interference, it varies. And you realize some of the countries, the violence or the magnitude of violence amongst sex workers is higher than others. This is, we know, because of either the religion that is widely accepted, or the religion that is there. So we've seen this, religion really drive the agenda of sex work, and governments want to put it as a moral issue, but they don't want to see it as a human rights issue. So we have seen even the political will, due to the influence of religion, becomes an issue. So governments will not have a political will to protect the rights of sex workers, will not have a political will to pass policies that are favorable to sex workers. I also spoke about, we have also realized, even in Africa, some of the context or some of the cultures are not the same. So as the African Sex Workers Alliance, we have gone further to ensure that each and every country or each and every context, the implementation that is done or the work that we are doing, we are very sensitive about the cultural and the context of those countries and the context of the sex workers environment that they operate in. Even this also applies in the different categories of sex workers, because how you program for a sex worker who's brothel based or street based is different from how you program for a sex worker who's online based. So these things and culture, religion is something that as we go on and as we even continue doing programming, things that we need to put in place and ensure that we follow and don't assume. And finally, I want to say that when we talk about advocacy, I think we get lost in advocacy as a uniform or just a frame that is this sort of a hole where we just get in and do advocacy. But one of the things that I want to say is advocacy can't be uniform. So advocacy should be, we should unpack advocacy. What do we talk about advocacy? When you say about different contexts, what do we say about advocacy? It cannot be uniform, but we need to continue at saying advocacy and what this advocacy is for different people, different contexts, and putting into consideration culture and religion. Yes, thank you.
Can I take over from where Grace has left? So I would like to contribute on the area of the transnational feminist movements, where you find some of the feminist movements organizations are closed and have no positions on sex work, which makes it difficult to be part of. And you'll find some of the movements struggle to understand, the feminist movements struggle to understand why the existence of sex workers, and they do not accept the fact that sex workers are female too. So as a recommendation, it is important for feminist movements to reach out to sex workers and embrace and include sex workers in the struggle, with an understanding that we are all fighting against patriarchy and we need to move collectively. There's also the spaces around Global Fund, Generation Equality Forum, the Commission on Status of Women, and Beijing Plus 25 that push for feminist agenda, and they are not explicitly embracing and putting specific provision and protection of sex workers or recognition. So they just have a neutral language in everything and any advocacy agenda that is being set. We've seen the advocacy at the African Union, where there is a lot of hostility to gender non-conforming, including sex workers, and they use words like prostitution, and they're very close to recognizing sex work as a human rights or a gender issue. So these are some of the barriers that sex workers are facing when it comes to pushing for spaces at advocacy tables. And it's very difficult for some of the advocacy spaces, as their positions, for sex workers to influence the advocacy barriers that they face. And we've seen that some of the issues that affect women across the board, even when it comes to global, region, and at the national level, we've seen that there is no access to contraception and sexual reproductive health commodities, and sex workers are not joining these spaces to advocate for the needs and the quantity of the commodities that are needed for the sex workers. Even it has been hard to join for the campaigns to these public spaces, and also how safe are they for the sex workers to join in. There are other issues regards to bodily autonomy that are not prioritized. and they are not deemed as important as the conflict issues. And now that we have COVID, no one is even caring that the sex workers also need to be factored in any of the design or any decision of implementing intervention that is being set for sex workers. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing all that. I would love to let Bharati or Alexis chime in on this one too before we might get into any audience Q&A.
देखिए पहले मैं बोलूंगा कि जैसे हम लोग जब 2001 में जो मेला किया था उस टाइम आपने को बोला कि से सेक्स वर्कर को पहले तो हम सेक्स वर्कर है, ये पहले तो हमसे मुद्दा उठाना चाहिए कि हमारा पेशा सेक्स है, पेशा सेक्स वर्कर पेशा है, हमारा काम यही है। तो पहले मेरा जो काम है, काम को इज्जत देना चाहिए, सम्मान देना चाहिए और सबका पास जाके हम आप में बोलेंगे कि हाँ हम सेक्स वर्कर है, आई एम ए सेक्स वर्कर। এটা কোনো লজ্জা নেই, वो तो कोई लाज नहीं, कुछ नहीं। तो हम जब सेक्स वर्कर नहीं बताएंगे तो दूसरा तो कोई हमको बोलेगा, हम खुद जब सेक्स वर्कर हमको नहीं बोलेगा, मैं हमारा पेशा को हम सम्मान नहीं करेगा, दूसरा क्यों करेगा? एक ही चाहिए। और दो है कि देखिए जे सबका पास जाके वो दूसरा जो महिला है उसका पास जाके भी हम बोलेंगे हम महिला है, ठीक है, एक महिला स्कूल टीचर है, एक महिला दूसरा काम करता है, हम एक महिला है, हम सेक्स वर्क करते हैं, काम तो एक ही होता है, काम का कोई फर्क नहीं है। तो सेक्स वर्कर का एक काम है, टीचर एक काम है, बैंक का जो ऑफिसर है वो एक काम है, जो दूसरा काम करता है वो डोमेस्टिक वर्कर वो भी काम है, काम काम ही है, सब पैसे के लिए काम करता है, तो इसमें कोई शर्म का बात नहीं है। दो नंबर है कि देखिए सब जगह में जाके एडवोकेसी करके हम लोग को अपना सेक्स वर्कर जाके खुद बोलने होगा कि हम सेक्स वर्कर है, हम हमारा राइट्स चाहिए, हमारा जो ह्यूमन राइट्स है, दूसरा महिला का जो राइट्स है, मैं सेक्स वर्कर हूँ, मेरे को भी एक राइट्स है, तो मेरा अधिकार हमको चाहिए, तो अधिकार के लिए हम बात करेंगे। हम जो काम करता है वो काम का बारे में काम करें, हम लोग ऐसा काम करता है, दूर बार जैसे पहले काम करते हैं तो एडवोकेसी करने के लिए हम लोग बोलते हैं HIV एड्स का हम लोग काम करते हैं, इंटरवेंशन प्रोग्राम है। तो जब इंटरवेंशन प्रोग्राम हम लोग चलाते हैं तो किसी का कोई विश्वास नहीं था, वो लोग ये सोचता था ये तो सेक्स वर्कर है, ये कैसे हेल्थ का काम करेगा, इसका पढ़ा लिखा नहीं है, कोई लिटरेट है, इसका कोई जानकारी नहीं है, लेकिन ये जबरदस्त करना पड़ा, नहीं हम लोग करके दिखाएंगे, हाँ हम लोग कर सकता है, तो हम लोग हेल्थ वर्कर हिसाब से काम किया। तो उसके बाद तो हर जगह में हम लोग एडवोकेसी किया, देखो हेल्थ का बारे में हम लोग अपना जाके हम लोग पीआर एजुकेटर, WW, क्लिनिक अटेंडेंट, हम लोग हर कुछ हम लोग अपने करता है, मतलब हम लोग करते हैं। जैसे हम लोग का एंटी ट्रैफिकिंग का काम होता है, जो सेल्फ रेगुलेटरी बोर्ड, जो बोर्ड का काम है कि कोई ना माइनर गर्ल ये पेशा में ना आए और एडल्ट इच्छा अनिच्छुक जो इच्छा विरुद्ध में नहीं आए, तेल हमको रेस्क्यू करता है। तो ऐसे बहुत सारे बच्चे लोग स्कूल में पढ़ता है, तो मतलब दूसरा महिला का तरह हमारा महिला भी है, दूसरा बच्चा की तरह हमारा बच्चा भी वैसे ही है, तो समाज से हम लोग एक ही है, हम लोग का नागरिक जो अधिकार है, नागरिकता जो अधिकार है वो अधिकार हम लोग को चाहिए। और जैसे हम बोलेंगे कि देखिए जो सेक्स वर्कर का कोई दूसरा सेक्स वर्कर को हम अपना पास लेके आएंगे, अपना संगठन में लेके आएंगे, तो उसको पहले जाके हम हमारा दोस्त है कि हमारा सहकर्मी है कि कौन है, वो तो बात का बात है, लेकिन पहले हम देखेंगे कि वो लड़की पर क्या प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है, चाहे कुछ भी हो, तो हम जाके उसके पास तुरंत जाएंगे कि हाँ ये सेक्स वर्कर मुसीबत में है, इसका पर वायलेंस हो रहा है, कुछ भी हो रहा है, तो हम जाके उसके साथ जाके खड़ा होंगे, उसके साथ बात करेंगे, उसको सुविधाएं देंगे, उसको हम लोग हेल्प करेंगे। तो आस्ते आस्ते सब सेक्स वर्कर के पास जाके हम लोग खुद जाएंगे, तो सेक्स वर्कर आस्ते आस्ते एक साथ में नेटवर्क में आ जाएगा, संगठन में आना जाएगा। हम लोग पहले ऐसे ही किया था कि एक के साथ एक ऐसे करते करते इतना सेक्स वर्कर आज संगठन में आया और इतना बढ़ गया। सरकार का तरफ से तो सरकार तो बोलेगा ही, देखिए हर कर्मी को जो श्रमिक है उसके लिए सरकार का तरफ से सुযোগ सुविधाएं है, तो जो सेक्स वर्कर को भी श्रमिक बोलेगा सरकार, तो उसको भी सुযোগ सुविधा देना पड़ेगा, इसीलिए सरकार तो नहीं मानना चाहते हैं, नहीं मानेगा, लेकिन हम लोग छोड़ेगा नहीं, हम लोग को मानना ही पड़ेगा, ये हम लोग मांगते ही रहेंगे, हक मानते ही रहेंगे। धर्म के लिए, जैसे धर्मों के लिए आप जो बात भी रहा है, देखिए सेक्स वर्कर कभी हिंदू मुसलमान क्रिश्चियन कुछ भी नहीं देखता है, हम लोग ये देखता है कि सेक्स वर्कर, हम एक सेक्स वर्कर है, वो एक सेक्स वर्कर है, वो एक सेक्स वर्कर है, उसका धर्म क्या है, वो मुस्लिम है ना हिंदू है ना क्रिश्चियन है, वो हम लोग नहीं देखते हैं। सेक्स वर्कर का बीच में ये देखा नहीं जाएगा और हम लोग देखेंगे नहीं, सबको बात बोलते हैं, इंडिया नहीं, हर कंट्री का सेक्स वर्कर का बात हम बोलते हैं। ऐसे कि देखिए जैसे जैसे हम बार बार ये बोलते हैं कि हम लोग जो ये जैसे आप लोग बोला ना कि कैसे लड़की लोग इकट्ठा हुआ, बाकी कैसे हम लोग मॉडल हुआ, तो देखिए हर जगह का सेक्स वर्कर का हालत एक ही है, किसी पर वायलेंस कम नहीं है, ज्यादा ही है, वायलेंस होता ही है। तो ये सेक्स वर्कर के लिए सबको इकट्ठा होना ही पड़ेगा। जैसे हम लोग हर कंट्री का लड़की लोग आया था, सेक्स वर्कर लोग आया था, तो उसका बारे में उसका कंट्री में जो जो होता है वो हम लोग का साथ में शेयर किया, हम लोग इंडिया का जो जो प्रॉब्लम होता है वो भी हम लोग शेयर किया, करते करते क्या ग्लोबल एक नेटवर्क बन गया। जैसे नेटवर्क बन गया कि आप हमारा बात सुने, आपका बात हम सुने, तो आस्ते आस्ते हम लोग दोस्त बन गया, नेटवर्किंग बन गया। ऐसे हम लोग आस्ते आस्ते संगठन बनाया और नेटवर्किंग बनाया। एडवोकेसी करते टाइम भी वैसे सेक्स वर्कर खुद जाएगा एडवोकेसी करने के लिए, लेकिन हर जगह में एक ही सिचुएशन नहीं है। ये सही है कि जैसे इंडिया में सेक्स वर्कर का जो हाल है उससे ज्यादा अफ्रीका में जाके, कोई यूएसए जाके, हम यूएसए गया था, तो उस टाइम में एक सेक्स वर्कर के साथ में बात हुआ था। एक पेंसिल्वेनिया का एक प्रोफेसर था तुर्जो बोल के, तो उसका साथ उसका बारे में हम था, तो उसका बोला यहाँ पर सेक्स वर्कर ओपन नहीं आता है, वो यहाँ का सरकार बहुत खतरनाक है, सरकार बहुत प्रॉब्लम करता है। तो सही में ये तो मुश्किल का बात है, इंडिया में उतना नहीं है कि सेक्स वर्कर को सामने देखेगा इतना करेगा। तो हर कंट्री में सेक्स वर्कर के लिए प्रॉब्लम है ही। ये प्रॉब्लम जब तक हम लोग प्रॉब्लम का चैलेंज का मुकाबला नहीं करेंगे तब तक हम लोग कुछ नहीं कर पाएंगे। हम लोग को जिंदगी भर ऐसे ही करना पड़ेगा, अलग से रहना पड़ेगा। कहे हमको क्या बोले, हमको कुछ भी करे, कोई भी वायलेंस करे, लेकिन हम बोलेंगे हम सेक्स वर्कर है, आई एम सेक्स वर्कर। हम सेक्स वर्कर, आपको क्या, आपका कोई जो काम है उसका बारे हम तो नहीं बोलता है। कोई मोहल्ला का, कोई परिवार का जो महिला है उसको बच्चे के लिए तो कोई कुछ नहीं बोलता है, वो उसी का बच्चा है, वो स्कूल टीचर का बच्चा है, ये प्रोफेसर का बच्चा है, नहीं बोलता है। लेकिन सेक्स वर्कर का बच्चे के लिए बोलता है ये सेक्स वर्कर चिल्ड्रेन है ना, ये बेश्या का चिल्ड्रेन है। ऐसा हम लोग क्यों सुनेगा, क्यों बोलेगा? हम भी महिला है, वो भी महिला है। ये ताकत हम लोग के पास सबको इकट्ठा होकर रखना ही पड़ेगा। चाहे आप लोग है, हम लोग है, सबको एक कट्टा एक साथ में रहना पड़ेगा, एक साथ में मुकाबला करना पड़ेगा, संगठन करना पड़ेगा, आवाज भी उठाना पड़ेगा। देखिए अभी 3 मार्च जो होता है, इंटरनेशनल सेक्स वर्कर्स डे, हर कंट्री में होता है। कैसे होता है? आ गया ना सब एक अम्ब्रेला का नीचे में, सब कोई तो एक ही दिन में हम लोग एक ही आवाज उठाता है, सेक्स वर्कर इज सेक्स वर्कर, सेक्स वर्कर सेक्स वर्कर, सेक्स वर्कर राइट चाहिए। तो सब कंट्री में सेक्स वर्कर लोग करता है, तो एक दिन तो बना और सब कंट्री में ये प्रचार भी हो गया, सबको एक साथ में लगा दिया। तो ऐसे हम लोग आगे बढ़ेंगे, आगे जाके ऐसा जरूर होगा। ऐसा कोई बात नहीं कि नहीं होगा, होगा, लेकिन प्रॉब्लम का मुकाबला करना पड़ेगा, ये बात है।
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we might only have time for one audience Q&A, but I saw one come in that was directed for Aswa or Keswa. It says, for my African siblings, how can Africans in the diaspora support the sex workers' rights movement on the continent? And how are you all using language or promises in the Maputo protocol to advance sex workers' liberation? I don't know if you know specifically about that, but I think it's more so just how Africans in the diaspora can support African sex workers.
Okay, so thank you for the question. I think the question directly comes to us. So as the African Sex Workers Alliance, we just finished our 5 years strategy. And one of the things that the communities felt that the African sex workers should do more is on the Maputo protocol. And I welcome this question because we as the African Sex Workers Alliance, I would say we have very little knowledge on the Maputo Protocol. So it's something that would like to be supported on, because we know the advantages of the Maputo Protocol, and it's something that you can be able to advance the issues of sex workers. So it's something that the African Sex Workers Alliance is willing to work and continue even advancing the advocacy agendas that we do at the African Union, the CEDAW, the UPR. So it's something that we can add, yes.
Thank you for that. Is there anything that any of the other panelists would like to add to this space in the last few minutes that we have? I would also like to end it after we end the YouTube stream. I would love to play a song so that we can have a miniature transnational dance party because I just am honored to be in this space, and I would love to share joy with you all too. Bharati, I see you unmuted, so I'd love to let you speak.
नहीं नहीं एक बात है कि 2012 में 2012 में हेलो हाँ हम लोग जब HIV इंटरनेशनल एड्स कॉन्फ्रेंस किया था तो उस टाइम में हेलो हाँ तो उस टाइम में हम लोग जब वीसा सेक्स वर्कर लोग हम लोग ये सब कंट्री का सेक्स वर्कर लोग जब वीसा करने के लिए गया था सेक्स वर्कर नाम देना नहीं चाहिए तो ऐसे तो बहुत प्रॉब्लम हो गया था तो हम लोग को ग्लोबल तो नेटवर्क की तरफ से तो वो बहुत मेंशन करने का कोशिश किया कि नहीं सेक्स वर्कर लोग जाएगा वो HIV कॉन्फ्रेंस में लेकिन अल्टीमेट लोग तो सुविधा ही नहीं दिया हम लोग को किया भी नहीं उस टाइम में हम लोग को वो ग्लोबल हर स्टेट का साथ में हम लोग बात किया सब सेक्स वर्कर साथ में ग्लोबल नेटवर्क बन गया और अल्टीमेट दुर्बार हिम्मत दिखाया कि नहीं ये इंटरनेशनल हब प्रोग्राम हम लोग इंडिया में करेंगे और 48 कंट्री से सेक्स वर्कर लोग आया था ये हब प्रोग्राम में और ये हब प्रोग्राम करने के बाद क्या किया हर स्टेट हर कंट्री का सेक्स वर्कर के साथ ग्लोबल नेटवर्किंग बना और अच्छा तरीके से स्ट्रॉन्ग एक नेटवर्किंग बना और हम लोग वहाँ का साथ इंटरनेट में उसका साथ बात किया उसका दिखाया कि हम लोग भी ये कलकत्ता में इंडिया में HIV कॉन्फ्रेंस कर रहा हूँ तो ऐसे तो हम लोग का ग्लोबल नेटवर्क की बन गया ना सब सेक्स वर्कर लोग एक साथ में हुआ जैसे रेड एम्बलर में सेक्स वर्क का जो मूवमेंट है उसको भी वो लोग साथ देता है सपोर्ट करता है अम्ब्रेला जो फंड है वो भी सेक्स वर्क का जो आंदोलन है जो मूवमेंट है उसको भी सपोर्ट करता है तो इसीलिए हम लोग को स्कोप है सब इकट्ठा होने का और एक साथ में आंदोलन उठाने का एक साथ में आवाज उठाने का ये हम लोग कर सकते हैं
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's a great last note too, before we end up cutting off the YouTube stream, that sometimes it is right, these barriers and these people like governments or the state saying no to us that makes us do the work that we do, right? And it makes us connect in these really amazing ways where, who knew that we would be able to get on a Zoom across 4 different continents, right? To like share in these like collective struggles and, like see how organizing right across difference across continents is totally possible, and it's also kind of necessary, right? Because we learn so much from each other, and in right that collective struggle that we grow stronger, but we also experience other things together like great friendship, joy, love, and that's why I would love to